welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players of the gigging variety. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm pumped as always to be here with you. And I'm joined as always by a man who, if he was a fruit, would be a fine apple. How are you, Paul?
Oh, hello, David, and hello, everyone else. A fine apple. Well, that's topical because apples are going to feature in this podcast.
Good point. That wasn't even intentional, and I'm even ashamed to admit I Googled, I think I might have said this in another episode, a daggy dad joke compliment site to find that one. But there you go, it did work out well. So no, we're excited to be here again, and this episode we're talking to Mr. Dan Mansfield. Now, Dan is an Australian musician, which it's been a while, Paul, since we've had someone locally on, and so it's great to have Dan on, and we're talking about his work across a range of bands, but also for our overseas listeners that may not know of these bands, and they are great bands worth checking out, like UMI and Gin Club and so on. We get into a fair bit of depth about everything from Hammond organs, repairing them, and a lot of Pink Floyd chat, Paul.
Exactly, David. And for those of our listeners and viewers who might not necessarily be familiar with Dan, what I'm going to suggest you do is we're going to have links to various stuff in the show notes. Please do yourself a favour and just have a listen to him play, because you're going to see he's quite a humble, self-effacing kind of guy, like a lot of Aussies are. We tend not to seek the limelight. We're pretty humble chaps and chapettes down here in the Antipodes. But let me tell you, this guy can play keyboard, and as you'll hear, he was playing with some of the greats of the Australian jazz scene as a 13-year-old. So don't worry about his ability. But yeah, check it out, and you'll really enjoy hearing some of his work.
So here we go, and we'll talk to you after the show. Dan, can't thank you enough for taking the time, and we're just joking before the show. It's nice to have all three of us in the one time zone, relatively.
It's pretty good. Not even daylight savings to muck it up. It's all the same.
Exactly. So no, I really appreciate it. I just thought we'd kick off, Dan, with one of our more traditional questions. Is tell us about your origins in music. What got you kicked off as a child or teen that made this a passion for the rest of your life today?
In primary school, I studied drums and percussion from grade 4 onwards, and ended up doing that all the way through high school, and did Trinity Music College and AMB exams, and was going to go to university to do it, but rock and roll got in the way. And but through playing drums at school, we had to learn xylophone. I couldn't afford a proper xylophone, so I ended up with a little Yamaha keyboard, and that's where all this started. Guitar and bass on the way through, because you can see I got stuff everywhere here. But probably since I was 8 or 9 years old, I've been constantly playing something.
And so what was your first, if not serious band, your first real band?
It's probably hard to tell, because I was quite young, but I got picked up by a lot of sort of community jazz bands and big bands. So I started playing professional gigs probably from 13, 14. So they were real bands. They were real, seasoned pros in them. I played with Kevin Hunt and George Goller and Don Burrows, famous Australian jazz players. Yeah. So I played bass for them when they came to my hometown, and so that's probably the real bands. But actual proper gigging bands, probably late high school, just out of high school. My first job out of high school was working in a music shop, so I met every muso in town, so I ended up in every band there was.
And if you had Don Burrows coming through town, Dan, when you were a teenager, what sort of lessons or education had you done to be able to step up to that stuff? Because, that's not unimpressive. Yeah,
so I did music through school. So I learnt percussion through instrumental teachers at school. Grade 11 and 12, I also did music specialisation as an extra subject. But I also did private lessons with percussion. Just doing those exams, those AMB exams and Trinity exams, they're quite full on. So, it was a lot of education in, a small amount of time that helped. He came to town as part of an education program as well, which was good to expose younger players to more advanced concepts. So yeah, it was all a very good deal. I'm from Toowoomba, which is just out of Brisbane, and it was quite a good music town as far as the high schools went. Yeah, it was very well sort of looked after as a kid as far as learning music and learning more about music, not just do re mi and exploring advanced concepts. So yeah,
that's right. And so what got you to transition? You mentioned bass there. When did the passion for keyboards first start, or was it out of necessity, or?
No, so part of high school music was learning guitar. I really got into that. Really got into Led Zeppelin, like hugely. And then through that, I got into bass because I just loved John Paul Jones bass playing, and really started listening to that. And then I learned that he played keyboard. So then I started listening to the keyboard parts. But from way back, like from the age I was 3, I kind of remember hassling my grandmother to play Dark Side of the Moon. And Pink Floyd is a big thing that'll come up often in our chat. But then sort of late high school, a Pink Floyd Pulse live album came out, and I really heard Hammond for what it is. Really loved hearing Rick write, and just really started to take notice of Leslie's spinning up and down and drawbar settings, and that really kicked me off on keyboards. Whereas a youth band I was playing in that belonged to the Air Force Cadets, they bought a Roland E16 Summer Ranger keyboard, and I'd take it home on weekends and hook it up to Cakewalk and an MPU 401 and start sequencing High Hopes and other Pink Floyd songs, and running out of polyphony and learning MIDI through that as well. Like just really getting deep in not only the playing side but the tech side.
For a young person playing in serious bands, as you said, Dan, how did that feel? Was that at all intimidating, or was it just like, no, it's just something I'm doing? Or
it just felt normal. I think it was because of what I wanted to do. It just felt normal. They were very supportive. Like everyone I played with was very supportive. Playing bass for Don Burrows, I remember him just telling me to let the notes sing over the bar. Like, don't cut off your notes and let it really flow, and just little tips like that. And even telling like the soloists, when you're playing over changes, don't change the scale over the change. Keep playing in the root pentatonic. I mean, it's a basic concept, but I still do it today. Like, and you sound like, and I heard them do it, and it made them sound like a pro. I'm like, well, this is pretty good. So I wasn't intimidated. I just wanted to learn from them the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're well known here in Australia for playing in the band UMI, and for our overseas viewers and listeners, UMI have that unique distinction of being a critically acclaimed Australian band, but also very, very popular as well. I'm interested in what led to you being able to get those sort of gigs.
Yeah, so being in the Gin Club, which they weren't contemporaries of UMI in any way, but we played a lot of the same places. I also followed the guitar player out of UMI, Davey Lane, his band called The Pitchers. My wife, when I met her, was a massive UMI fan. I was aware of them, but through her, we started to go see all their sort of little side groups and started to get to know them. The Gin Club supported Tim Rogers, the singer of UMI, a fair bit. Just got to know each other through the same scene. Gin Club ended up touring with another band where Stevie Hesketh was the keyboard player, and he used to be the keyboard player in Jet, but at the time he was playing keys for UMI. And he started to not be able to play gigs with them, so he offered it to me. And because I already sort of half knew them and hung around many times with them, it was kind of an easy fit. But it just sort of took off, and I kind of shared it with Stevie for a bit, but then Stevie was also in a band called The Drones, which were quite popular at the time. They don't exist anymore, unfortunately, but they're called something else now, which I won't repeat on air. They're not The Drones, but they're called something else. The Drones just started taking up so much of his time that I ended up doing a lot of the UMI work. Whereas I tended to get all the prestigious stuff. Like I went on tour supporting Cole Chisel with them for 6 weeks and did big, massive Triple J things in Sydney, 35,000 people and all that kind of stuff. Whereas Stevie ended up with all the little pub and club gigs, which I wish I could have done more of those. But and I did get to do a few, which was good. My first one was in Toowoomba, my hometown. So my first UMI gig was in Toowoomba, which was pretty cool.
That is very cool. And as Paul mentioned, you and I are a iconic Australian band. And so is that your first, I know Gin Club was certainly a well-respected band as well, was that your first major league rock band? It must have been, I'd say, Dan, a tropical fuckstorm of an experience.
Yeah, you said it. Yeah.
So that's a joke for our audience. That's what the drones became. I had to Google it. I won't claim I knew it off the top of my head. It must have been a hell of an experience stepping up to that. What are your recollections of that first gig?
It was hectic, and I got the call, and I only had 2 weeks to prepare, and I got the set list probably a week before. I was up on most of everything I'd ever done, but they'd just released a new album, and the thing with that new album was that they were triggering samples. Not as backing tracks, but there was like beds underneath. I had to trigger a female vocal sample on time to fill in holes. So it was quite daunting. But the gig was good. But the rig I had to put together was just Frankenstein. Like, just to be able to cover everything they needed, I just wasn't ready equipment-wise for it. So it was a little bit weird bringing all of this stuff just to be the keyboard guy at the back. But no, it was really good. So that was, and it was 3 gigs in one weekend, and the next 2 were supporting Powderfinger on their last 2 shows in Brisbane, which were really sort of special for people from Brisbane, especially. So that was like going from hometown to River Stage in Brisbane, thousands of people, sold out River Stage outdoor gig. Yeah, it was a pretty dream weekend.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And do you recall what you just said? You had a sort of a monstrosity of a rig. What were you having to set up to be able to pull that off?
I had a Kawai ES1 piano. I wouldn't call it. It's a piano, but it wasn't a stage piano by any means. But it was an 88 note. I needed a good sort of hammer action, and it was that. And I had a Roland VK7, which I'd had for years before that, and that was my trusty workhorse for Gin Club as well. And I had to go buy a laptop to trigger the samples. And I had to do a bit of quick MIDI stuff to try and sort of tie those to keys on the VK7 to trigger those. But I didn't have the right leads. Like, I just was not prepared. I just didn't have like good leads or anything. I'd been just playing around little things with Gin Club, and everything's getting broken all the time because Gin Club are a bit raucous, I guess. So yeah, rig-wise, it was just like terrible. I ended up having, can't remember why, I had those Line 6 green and blue delay and modulation pedals up on top of the organ, and I don't know why. I've just seen in photos that they're on there, and I'm like, I just can't remember what I used them for. But there was obviously a need for it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, you and I are obviously known for some great songs, but being keyboard driven is certainly not one of them. There's obviously some key parts there. How did you find the experience of, particularly having worked in jazz and Gin Club and that, where keyboard probably was a little bit more central, that you really are understandably taking a back seat to the guitars? And I mean, nowadays, I don't believe you and I tend to play with a keyboard player at all. How did you find that adjustment?
I kind of asked Tim what he wanted, and he just said, let your freak flag fly. So I did. And I like a lot of the music that they, like, I come from the same place that do. I know a lot of the things they're referring to when they play and what they write. So there's all the obvious mellotron and organ parts that they have on a lot of their songs. But when it was just a really guitar-driven song, I just play overdriven whirly, like Ian McLagan, Faces kind of stuff. And I don't know if they noticed me there playing it, but no one ever complained. And they kept me on for 5 years, so it must have been doing something right after that weekend. So, yeah.
You can't have been annoying them too much, Dan, by the sound of that.
Yeah.
So tell us about Gin Club. So again, another successful band, and also critically acclaimed, with winning multiple awards. But tell us about the formation of that, your role there. What can people who haven't heard Gin Club expect to hear?
It's very eclectic. But the way I got into it was they formed and I forced my way into the band. So they existed probably for 18 years, 2 months, and I kept hearing about them and hearing them and seeing them, and people say they sound like the band, and I was really into the band at the time and all that sort of Americana stuff. And I just wrote to Ben, the lead singer, and said, I'd like to play keyboard for you. Can I come along? Anyway, no. And Ben's pretty adventurous in life. And he just said, yeah, bring your keys to this gig. We're going to Canada the next day. You can't come on that trip, but come have a play. I went and had a play, and no rehearsal, just went in and played, and I was in the band from there on in. Yeah, but to explain how it works is sometimes there's 10 people in the band, sometimes there's 7, sometimes there's 4, 2. It varies on who's available, but everyone writes their own song, and when they do their own song, they step up the front and play guitar or play bass and sing or whatever, and everyone else swaps around. But everyone also gets really drunk at the same time. So it ends up quite entertaining. I mean, we always made it to the end. Like, it wasn't, it wasn't really that bad, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. And initially it started out being very sort of folky Americana, but by the end it got kind of psychedelic, almost like power pop kind of stuff, very sort of Split Enz, Crowded House kind of stuff. And it was incredibly enjoyable because as a keyboard player, you just played parts for all these different styles. Like Brad, one of the original guys, really loved Dire Straits. And I'm like, that's great. I love Alan Clark. Do you want Alan Clark style organ on this song? Yes. So I got to play that style. Some people wanted Garth Hudson style organ. Some people wanted all this different kind of stuff. And some people just wanted weird stuff. So it was really, really good for that. Very varied. We're doing some shows again for the first time in, it must be 6 years, in July.
Yeah,
so
great.
Looking forward to that, yeah.
So what's coming on stage with you when you do those shows, Dan?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm only able to do one of them because I've got a Honey Sliders gig on the Brisbane night, but one of the other guys has a Nord stage. And if I have to use it, I will. I'm not a Nord fan. Normally through most of the time I was in the band, I had the VK7.
Yep.
And because the one bad thing about the VK7 is in its extra voices, it never had a piano. It had an electric piano, but it never had a normal acoustic piano. So I had this old Korg N5, which was quite a sort of, I wouldn't say formidable, but very sort of mid-range powerful synth from the late 90s, which could kind of do anything. Just not spectacularly, but enough to get through gin club stuff. And it was very light. It was only a 61, so it used to sit up on top, and that was my piano as well. Later on, when I got the PC3, the 76 Kurzweil, I'd just do that. But then later on, I ended up getting a Hammond Suzuki endorsement for a while when the SK1 came out. So it was the Kurzweil and the SK1, and that was the UMI rig forever. The Cold Chisel tour with UMI, I used to use the SK1, but yeah, for every other UMI show after that was the Kurzweil and the SK1.
I've got to ask Dan, just you mentioned Cold Chisel twice. I've got to ask the Don Walker question. Did you get to have a chat to him?
Every day.
Great.
Yeah, he's a lovely guy. And at the time, my normal employment was working on F-111s for the Air Force. And he had spent time before Cold Chisel working for DSTO, Defence Science Technology Organisation, designing pylons for F-111s to carry weapons. So we ended up talking about that a lot, but he was kind of really obsessed with the SK1 versus the Nord. We used to play a lot of Deep Purple in sound checks. We used to play Highway Star in sound check all the time, and they'd all come out and have a look because the SK was pretty good at a distorted Leslie. But yeah, we ended up talking about Hammonds a lot, and yeah, all kinds of stuff. He's a lovely guy, and a great player to watch too. Like kind of don't really get like actually how good he is, but he's very good and just so cool about it. Like just cool about everything.
Cool is
Yeah.
definitely the word. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Now, you've mentioned Hammonds a couple of times, Dan, so I thought we might go down that rabbit hole. So, what really was your first experience that developed that huge love of Hammonds for you? And then I want to talk about what you do with Hammonds since. But just what got you into them?
Well, hearing it on Pulse, the live Pink Floyd album, really sort of triggered it. And then you go back and you listen to other stuff, and it's pretty much in every song that's ever been recorded. Like, it's everywhere. Then my dad was really into Deep Purple, and I really started seriously getting into Deep Purple. And then we went and saw Deep Purple, and I heard one in real life, and I'm like, that's it. Hearing John Lord play a Hammond in real life with two Leslies was just glorious. And then I went and got the VK7, which was the closest I could get. And it was the clone at the time. And I just went deep from there, and I just started just listening to anything that had Hammond on it. Just absolutely anything. But yeah, it was just sort of John Lord was my first idol on Hammond, and not so much now, which is kind of sad because I really love him. But I tend not to play like him anymore, which is probably more the bands I've been in rather than by personal choice. But it's from then on I started getting into like Jimmy Smith and Jimmy McGriff and like the jazz players, Santana, and then sort of more modernish bands. Like there was a band called Cooler Shaker from England, early 90s. Jay Darlington in that band, one of my absolute Hammond heroes. No one really knows who he is, but yeah, they had a couple of albums, their first two albums that he plays on, just amazing Hammond playing. My first proper Hammond gig was playing Hammond for Jesus Christ Superstar.
Oh, well, that's, yeah.
Which has got a lot in it, but I added more. They didn't seem to care. They said it just sounded right, so I just kept doing it. And then, I ended up moving to Brisbane and getting with more like-minded people. And this is a big sort of point. I ended up playing bass in a Pink Floyd tribute band. And the keyboard player in that had a C3, like this one, and a Leslie. And that was it wasn't the first one I ever got to play, but it's the first one I got to play a lot and really learn it. And then out of that band, we formed our own band. And I was the Hammond player in that band while he played guitar. And from then on, I ended up buying this one and several others. And I tend to I don't put it on everything, but yeah, it's become my specialty just from knowing so much about them and just being exposed to all the different styles. And yeah, I became the go-to guy in town for a while.
You're well known as a repairer of Hammond keyboards as well. Have you had to do any bush mechanic type stuff on the road when you've been using real Hammonds and that sort of thing to get you out of trouble?
Hammonds are pretty solid. It's the Leslies that are the problem. Hammonds drawbar wires break off all the time. The wires at the end of these things break off all the time. You can get away with a little bit of sticky tape through the middle of a gig, but it's preferable to solder it on. If you lose a drawbar, like you've got 4 sets, so you've got 2 per manual, so it's okay. You can kind of get around it. You'll do a tube every now and then. They're very tough. Like, they're actually very tough. Leslies are not tough. And Leslie motor stacks start to separate a bit. There's a video of me playing in a band where I'm kicking the Leslie, trying to get it into fast just to get the motor like back together. Like, so they're very sort of agricultural in their design. They're great, but most of the horror stories are Leslies, and especially the mechanics of them. Yeah, and I just hate losing a fast motor. Like, you can lose a slow motor and you can sound all jazzy, but lose a fast motor and you just can't sweep up into sort of triumphant big chords and things. It's just, falls pretty flat. So Yeah, most of the repairs I've done have been for other people and my own, and getting them and then restoring them and for other people and then giving them back. Unfortunately, you can't save them all. There's a certain period of Hammonds which, through the manufacturer, they ended up putting foam in to seal under the keys. And that foam goes real brittle and sticky and gooey. And under these keys, there's not millions, there's a lot of real little fine wires. And this glue eats through those wires. And once it's through, I've tried to repair it. There's other guys in America can do it to an extent, but yeah, some of them are lost cause, unfortunately. It's more age that kills them than use. And storage. Like, if they're stored well, like, there's models from the 30s, like original Bs and As. Like, there's an A in the Smithsonian Museum. I think it was 1936 it was made. It still goes. This one's a 61 and it's pretty good. It hasn't, it's been on the road, but not an awful lot, not compared to some others. It's not like Lachy Doley's. He's played this one and I sort of like, oh, what's he going to do to it?
Yeah, I can imagine he's a bit, he'd be a punishing user.
Yeah, I mean, I do all that too if I got the chance. I'd because that's part of it. Like, you've got to abuse it. Like, it's made for it. But yeah, I've hats off to him for taking that thing around everywhere, because I think it's slightly older than this one, and to load that in his little van and take it around, like, that's commitment. I wish I could do it, but yeah, there's some pretty good plugins around these days too, unfortunately.
No, great. And I'm imagining that the love of the Hammond is very much coming in handy for your gig with the honey sliders. So let's talk a little bit about that. I've seen a few videos, Dan, and you guys cover an amazing amount of work, and also cover particular artists in depth. And I know you've got something coming up very cool in September. Just tell us about the honey sliders, how that came about and your role there.
So we've been playing together. Well, three of us have been playing together for probably 17 years. I met the lead singer and guitarist Danny through another guy's band, Andrew Morris, who I played Hammond for, strangely enough. And I started playing gigs with Danny for a while. Then we ended up getting a kind of residency at a new venue in Brisbane about 10 years ago called Lefties. And we did it as a three-piece where I just did... I played. They had an upright piano that was gutted, and they put a Roland RD 600 in it to make it look good. But you know, it was better than playing a Mike Dold shitty piano and bass at the same time. But then we ended up getting a bass player, and his idea was we should do the band's The Last Waltz, which was crazy. So, actually, sorry, there was one before that. The year before we did, with a heap of gin club people, Andrew Morris, a couple of friends of mine, we did Neil Young's On the Beach, and the Honey Sliders name came from that. So the Honey Sliders is a Neil Young reference that came from that. And we did Neil Young's On the Beach, which no one turned up to because no one knows what it is, because it never came out on CD until recently. But it's a great album. Sorry, then fast forward, Boz joined the band, the bass player. He said we should do the band's Last Waltz. And Danny, the lead singer, he's been through cancer. He's been through bad cancer 3 times. And at the time, he was still sort of just coming out of his last bout, and he was on a lot of drugs, steroids and the like, and he took it and ran with that idea and just convinced like anyone he could to come and do it. So we ended up with Bernard Fanning, Troy Cassar-Daley, Ian Hogue from Powderfinger. We had 3 of Powderfinger on stage at one point. It's heaps of other people. I'd have to look at the post to see other people, but we ended up having a 17-piece band do it with brass, 2 drummers, 2 keyboard players, so many different guitar players, and we covered the band's Last Waltz concert just for one night. And that sold out, and probably because of all the famous people, not because of us. And we thought we should just do this every year. The next year, I think we did Abbey Road, and that was with other famous people. Then we started doing Stones albums with Tim Rogers as singer. So Danny's also played with Tim Rogers' solo band. I know Tim from You Am I. We fly Tim up, put him in a hotel. We say, okay, we're going to do Sticky Fingers. Great. He does it. We've done Let It Bleed with him. Great. He does it. And it's a lot of fun. But the real sort of big one that we've done recently, we did a Cream Disraeli's Gears night, which was pretty fun, but there was not much keyboards in it because I play guitar in the band as well. But the big one that we've been doing the last couple of years is the Beatles Rooftop concert, and that was kind of inspired by the Get Back movie that came out recently. So we've been doing that one for 3 years now because people just keep asking for it. So we do the rooftop section, but it only goes for about 20 minutes because they only played 5 songs and they did several of them 2 or 3 times. So we do Get Back twice just to sort of show that's what we did. But then the second half, originally when we were doing the second half, we were just picking like the real obscure, like really deep stuff, and it went really well. But yeah, getting a few people right to us like, I don't know what that song is, and we're just playing really deep stuff from Magical Mystery Tour and Sgt. Pepper and stuff. But now it's sort of evened out a bit, and we play everything from Love Me Do right up to Abbey Road. But yeah, there's a lot of different types of Hammond in the Beatles as well, because you've got your Billy Preston Hammond, but you've also got Paul and John playing Hammond with no Leslie in certain songs, or there's a lot of treated Hammond like through ADT, and so it's pretty cool. Like if I took the real one, I wouldn't be able to do them all. Like I could do the Billy Preston stuff, okay, but I'd have to take a heap of pedals and stuff to try to replicate all those different types of Hammond in that. But through using Kurzweil's and my little SK1 and stuff and plugins and things, it's easy to try to nail those sort of really processed sounds as well.
So, question without notice, Dan, you mentioned the Get Back film and the fact you're doing the Rooftop concert. So, first supplementary question, how many times have you watched all 8 hours of Get Back?
Twice.
That's impressive. I only watched it once.
Yeah, the twice was very fragmented. I need to sit down and watch it all again. But the time it came out, I think by the time the kids were in bed, we were starting at 10 o'clock, and it was very late finish. But every night that it came out, we watched it. And then the second time, it was more of a analysis, sit down seriously, and what are they doing there, and what were they playing there, and but I just need to watch it for enjoyment. Yeah. Once more, I think.
But that was my second supplementary. What did you take out of it? What were the key messages or interesting tidbits you from observing them at work?
And I think the main thing that most people did was it wasn't the big argument that everyone ever said it was. It was just good to see them having fun, I think. I was kind of already familiar with a lot of what they call the Nagra tapes, which are all the bootlegs of those sessions. So it was good, for me, it was good to see the image that went with what was going on in that tape. Because for this Honey Sliders show, I kind of dive into what they call them, recordings of illegitimate origin. And I use that as source material for samples. So I've listened to a lot of the sort of outtakes and stuff. So it was good. Watching Get Back, it was really good to see what they were actually doing when they were having that conversation. And I think a lot of people took context out of those bootlegs as it was an argument or they were having a bad time. But if you actually see the vision, it's like, no, they're just joking.
That's right.
And it was really good to see right up to the end, they were still mates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, well put. And the bit that I think it actually did bring a tear to my eye, Dan, was when Billy Preston turned up and they're having a bit of a struggle. I feel bad. It might have been Get Back itself, but they're having a struggle with some songs and just how he lifted that room.
Oh yeah, I think it might have been Don't Let Me Down.
It was too.
Yeah, and just him adding that texture to it. I mean, and that's all it takes sometimes. You just need that extra person to come in. I mean, he's a prodigy. He was a prodigy, and they knew him well. But yeah, just to turn up and sit down and do what he did, shot in the arm they needed, and it wouldn't be that album without him. Like, he is the fifth Beatle in that album, for sure. I have a hard time playing those bits still, because it's just all 10 fingers most of the time. Like, the Get Back solo, everyone knows it, but if you learn it properly, oh geez, it's tricky. And I try to get it as close as I can. And some of the inversions and sort of voicings he uses, and they all come from gospel. And I think that's where Hammond helps too, because he uses on those Rhodes parts on that, he uses a lot of organ sort of gospel voicings too. So you have sort of open thirds and things like that, where it's just, okay, that's what he's doing, just playing organ on the Rhodes. So yeah, and going through sort of Hammond land, learning all the Hammond stuff, I got his first couple of solo albums pretty early on too. So they're excellent. If you haven't ever heard them, they're really good. And he's a great singer as well. Like he went a bit funny in the end, a bit sort of funky and sort of a bit sort of middle of the road. But those first two ones are really good solo albums. And even his organ instrumental albums when he was young, they're great. They're a little bit cheesy in parts, but yeah, a lot of people took a lot from Billy Preston, which I don't think that ever gets recognised. Like his big swipes across the lower manual he does. Everyone does that, but I don't think it's ever sort of recognised that. I think that's where it comes from. It comes from him.
Do you reckon there's one particular player that informs your own style, your own Hammond style, Dan, when you reflect on all these people that you've mentioned?
The one that always comes out is Rick Wright. And I think a lot of that's to do with a lot of the time I'm a background player, and he is the best background player. And a funny story is I was driving somewhere. I was driving on the way to work, and I was tuned to the local sort of community radio station Triple Z, and this song started with this Hammond part, and I'm like, that's really good. Like, who's this local person playing like Rick Wright? That sounds like Rick Wright. And the singing starts, and it's like, oh, it was me. Like I'd forgotten the session, but it was actually me. And it sounds a bit naff to say that, like, oh, it was me, but that was kind of like the ultimate sort of proof to myself that that's the one that comes out all the time. And I think that's from that very early age of listening to Pink Floyd and being totally obsessed with them. And yeah, I just love his textures and things. Probably the other one is Ian McLagan from Small Faces and the Faces. He's kind of like what I call my pretty organ playing, where, yeah, he does all those sort of lovely, sweet melodies high up. And so, yeah, probably between those two. They're my two go-tos that I don't have to think about. They're just sort of in me, yeah.
I think Rick Wright's use of the Leslie too is just so judicious, and it just adds so much.
Yeah, he's the best. Yeah, and it's not flashy. It's perfect, and it's never on the. It doesn't really ever seem to be on the beat. Like, it's at no particular point. It's just when he does it, it just gives it the right lift, or it gives it the right sort of slow down and air. Yeah, I think Leslie switching has to be subconscious. I don't think it can be calculated at all. You can kind of hear, like, the more you play organ, you can kind of hear a calculated Leslie switcher. That's probably a phrase that's never ever been said, but
I like it. We'll write that one down. Yeah. Calculated Leslie switcher.
Yeah.
So you mentioned hearing yourself from a session you might have forgotten. Do you do a lot of session studio work now to mix up between the live work that you do?
I haven't for a little while because I've just been too busy doing other things, but I'm going to start doing it again soon. I've just built this place. I'm going to start doing sort of online stuff. A lot of it's been people want the real thing, but I've not had a place to have the real thing set up for a while. Where other houses we've lived in, I've had a space to do it, but now I've got a space again. Yeah, and people want the real thing. Yeah, I'm going to start doing it again.
Good. Any studio experiences that stand out for you, Dan, where you particularly found them memorable or learnt something new yourself? Or
yeah, I guess so. I probably ones away from bands I've been in when I've gone to do sessions for other people and having a producer say this, not this, not this, not this. And really getting to sort of trust the producer that they know what they're doing, because when you get the final thing, you go, okay, well, that's what they wanted. Just, yeah, learning to trust what the producer wants. Because you go in there and you play all the organ stuff, and then you think, oh, well, they don't want the organ stuff. They keep telling me not to do the organ stuff, but it's their project, their record. So, yeah, learn to really work with the people that hired you rather than come in and blazing and do John Lord over everything, and it just doesn't fit. So that's probably the biggest lesson. Memorable experiences. I think because I've done so many of them, they kind of all blend together a little bit. A lot of the memorable ones have probably been Gin Club ones because I ended up actually recording at least one and a half of their albums as well. So my experience is like non-stop 2 weeks of recording memory rather than individual little tidbits. Like I remember making those albums. Every little bit of them, lived them.
So, Dan, we ask every one of our guests this question. Do you have any live performance train wreck stories that you can share with us?
Yeah, Honey Sliders doing Abbey Road. So the idea with Honey Sliders is we do the album in the first set. Second set we do other stuff, same band. That Abbey Road show we finished with A Day in the Life. And through the places where I get certain things from, I was able to get the orchestra crescendo isolated. So I had that as a sample on Kurzweil. And I had the final chord, the big four piano chord with the air conditioning sound at the end chord, loaded into the Kurzweil. Just before that show began, that sample failed. And I think I made a mistake when I trimmed it up. So I had to quickly reload it. And I tested it sound check and it was okay. And yep, show's great. We've just done Abbey Road. We've done all these other songs, like heaps of other songs. Did both the big orchestra crescendos and A Day in Life. Hit the last note. The actual other problem was I couldn't trigger it. So I had another guy playing keys with me, but he was midied to my Kurzweil. And he was going to trigger that note for me. For some reason, I had my hands full doing something else. He smashed the key, and I actually made like no velocity at all. Like it had to be like you could breathe on the key, and that thing would come up as loud as you ever wanted. He hit the key, and it just went, and it was just such an anticlimax because you're building up to this big moment, and then blah, and I still don't know what happened. That's probably the biggest.
That's excellent.
Yeah. It was very Spinal Tap.
It is very Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
No, that's great, Dan. Appreciate that one.
Yeah.
And so what's coming up for you next? So you've already mentioned the rooftop gigs and they're coming back. What do you see happening for you in the next year or two? Anything exciting on the horizon you can talk about, or just playing it by ear?
We were meant to do Neil Young's Everybody Knows This Nowhere around COVID time. And that never happened because of COVID. And that has no keys on it, that album, which was kind of good because I have to lug less stuff, but it's my own choice to do all this. But we ended up doing 3 of those shows and they went really well, but people kept asking for more Harvest stuff. And we had planned to do Harvest last year because that would have been the 50th anniversary. But someone else beat us to it. Just before we were about to announce it, someone else did it. So we thought, we'll just do it this year. So now we're doing Neil Young's Harvest, which is a lot of piano stuff. But like the thing about Kurzweil's is like for all of these different shows, they have a capability that I haven't untapped yet. So for these ones, I'm using the song mode. So I'm actually sequencing the 2 big orchestral tracks, There's a World and Man Needs a Maid, where I now have sequences that we play along with, and it's a bit backing track, and that's right. But because of our sort of MO is try to make it as close as we can to the original, these things have been great at it. And they're getting old, these keyboards, but they just keep surprising me as what they can do. So, yeah, even though it's like mainly a piano album for me as far as keys, like I still get to use the potential of these great machines to make the show better. So
what Kurzweils are you using, Dan?
So I've got a PC3 K7 and a PC3 LE8. So the K7, my first one was a K2000, but it was a K2VX, which was the purple one that came out, which was kind of like the tricked up K2000. But it was secondhand from university, and it had been abused, and the backlight had gone on the screen, and the drive didn't work anymore, and if you could get samples in it, it dumped them all the time. But it sounded great, and I learnt vast synthesis through that. And then I bought a heap of other stuff, like I bought Rolands and Yamahas and Korgs and Gem S76 and all these kind of things. And I just wasn't getting anywhere with them. I ended up going to laptops and plugins all the time because the keys weren't doing anything. I just said, I want to stop carrying all this stuff around and plugging in laptops and doing all the stuff. I'm going to sell everything and get PC3 K7, that was the top of the line at the time. And I went with the 76 because I could fly with it better than an 88, because the 88 was just so much heavier. And I said to my wife, when I bought it, I said, I will never need to buy another keyboard ever again. And I've only bought one.
We all told our wives that, Dan.
I know. And I've only bought one since. And it's another one, the same. Kind of the same. But I just wanted an 88 because the 76 is great for flying and compactness, but its action is no good for piano. It's just, yeah. And now that I play more piano stuff and less organ things, it was great for doing the odd bit of piano. But now we do all this kind of piano stuff. I really needed something that felt like a piano. And the other one came up secondhand for not much money at all, and I just grabbed it straight away. So between the two of them, they're fantastic. I'd love a 2700, a K2700.
I was about to ask you that. I was going to say you're stashing cash under the pillow somewhere to save up for 2700.
They're worth more than my car. And like even these things, like that was worth more than the car I had at the time. But I'm so glad I bought it. Like you can just do anything with them. And they haven't broken down yet. So I try to look after them. And luckily I have the ability to fix things, but some things you can't fix when it gets to newer stuff. It's
I believe your man Richard Wright used a K2000 as well on tour with Pink Floyd.
Yeah, and that's probably where it came from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think seeing those in Pulse again and then just hearing all those sounds coming over to one keyboard. Well, how are they doing that? And then seeing ads in keyboard magazines and then just sort of learning a bit more about who used them and what you could do with them. I just said I was going to get one day, and the KTVX came up, and it was a great introduction to it, but it was 61 note and wasn't good for everything. But to get one and learn, well, this is why they use them, because you can do whatever you want. You can make whatever you want. So that's why I did it. And the show that never happened, unfortunately, I was meant to do Piper at the Gates of Dawn with two guys out of UMI, Ash Naylor, who plays in the church now, but played in the Rock Whiz band and plays in all kinds of stuff, and Robin Hitchcock from the UK. We're meant to do Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and I built a Farfisa in the Kurzweil out of their analog synthesis engine. And I did because there's a thing on Farfisas where you can get the vibrato, the tremolo to interact with the repeat percussion, and that's a very Rick Wright sound. And you even hear it on Division Bell, like you hear it in the later albums. And I built that through synthesis in the Kurzweil, like no laptops, nothing. And unfortunately the show didn't happen. I spent so long on that. But going through those exercises, you can sort of really learn on how these things work. So yeah, Rick used Kurzweils right up until the end. John Caron, who played with him in there, used them until recently. They're a great machine.
Yeah, previous guests we've had who've used them absolutely swear by them. No, they absolutely love them. So it sounds like you're in that club as well, Dan.
Yeah, I think once you're in, you're in.
Yep.
I've tried other things. I could go back to Korg quite easily because I know the Korg way of doing things quite well too. But yeah, once you've learned vast and you know that you can basically do anything, like it's really, I just have to save up to get a new one. One day, but I think these guys will do all right for a while.
You were talking before about your formative years as a young musician, some key advice you received from greats like Don Burrows. What advice would you give to a young aspiring player now, based on everything you've learned from your time playing live and in the studio?
Oh, it's always about playing with people, not for yourself. Always. see a lot of sort of young bands today. They tend to do that. Like I mean, I don't follow a lot of things, but I think that is kind of alive and well, where it becomes the ensemble rather than the individual. I think that's the best advice you can do. We've all played with show-offs, and sometimes that's the most appropriate thing to do, but most of the time it's not. And I think to get the most fun out of it and the most sort of artistic merit out of it, you have to play with the group. So yeah, that'd be my advice. Like, really listen to other people, and because all those great bands, that's what they did. They listened to each other. They didn't overplay. Like even prog bands, like full of wizards, and could do anything that they wanted. But as an ensemble, you can tell what Genesis sounds like. You can tell what Yes sounds like because of the way they played together, not because of the individuals.
Yeah, well put. No, I love that. And Dan, we also ask all of our guests to tag another keyboard player, someone you'd be interested in hearing their life story in playing keyboards. Anyone that comes to mind?
Yeah, I'd like to hear from John Caron, who's been... You might not get him. But,
no, we have tried, but we'll keep trying.
Yeah, he's got such an interesting story to come from Brian Ferry and then Pink Floyd and then Roger Waters and then David Gilmour and then Roger Waters and then Pink Floyd together, and now Roger Waters and not so much David Gilmour. That's a pretty interesting story. But it's also, like, he's done The Who. Like, he did Quadrophenia with The Who, and I'd love to know how he did that. And I think that's what I'd want to know, like, how does he do it? I've tried to ask him on Facebook. I get the odd reply from him, but there's some things like, how are you doing this? And I know it's Kurzweils, it's sequences, it's software, and things, but what's going on in his head to think of it? One of my favourite performances of his is the Kate Bush live album, After the Dawn.
Yeah, it's amazing, that album.
We have listened to that so many times in our house. Our kids know it off by heart. It's just... And you don't really know what he's doing on that, because it's another guy as well. But the way... And you probably sort of get an idea, like, he's replicating all that old Fairlight stuff and the old CS80 stuff, where it's just flawless. And he's got this thing where he can sort of make it... It does the retro thing, but he sort of brings it into the modern age in some way. And yeah, I'd really like to hear from him. So keep trying.
Yeah, we'll keep chipping away, Dan. That's remotivated us to keep up.
Okay, good.
Look, and you know, we agree with everything you said there. We're big fans, so we'd love to know all those things you brought up there. Another question we love to ask our guests, and I believe we've given you appropriate notice, so we're not putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I've listened to a few.
The 5 discs, the 5 Desert Island discs.
I have to cheat. Are you allowed to cheat?
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone else has, you can.
So I've thought about it a lot. And I think I'm going to do it from my perspective as a keyboard player. Because as a guitar player, a bass player, a drummer, it's all different things. But being the keyboard chronicles, I'll stick with the keyboard. So first would be Animals, Pink Floyd. Because it's the best. Second, probably not as good as a Wink by the Faces. I just love Ian McLagan. He's a great player. Third, Caravan Sarai by Santana, which was their 4th album. That's got some... It's quite a weird album. Are you guys aware of that one at all?
Not in depth, but no, it's
it's really quite different. And Greg Rowley, the organ player, vocalist, he does some really, really beautiful things on the organ on that album, which I try to rip off all the time, but I think it's got to be in context. I don't think you can do that all the time. I have to say... Peasants, Pigs and Astronauts by Cooler Shaker. That's Jay Darlington, who I mentioned before. Not just for organ, but for just everything he does on it. It's kind of like, it's not really... It probably is a heavy keyboard album, but it's just all very tasty. There was another one that I was going to say. I probably do have to say Ed Harsh from the Black Crowes. probably Amorica. Yeah, their second album with him. Ed was just a genius. He could play anything, absolutely anything. So you listen to any of those Black Crowes albums that he's on, you'll get every style of keyboard. Like, he's a prog monster, he's a beautiful piano player, he's a lovely organ player. No synths or anything, but just so tasty all the time. So they're probably my 5
Great picks.
keyboard ones, yeah.
And I thought you might, at least you weren't unoriginal, because some huge Beatles fans previously had picked the Beatles box set, so at least you didn't, fall to that level. So that's great.
Yeah, there's just, Beatles are a different thing. Like, you can't put them in the top list because they're their own religion.
That's right.
And it's like, I'd love to put Led Zeppelin, and I love John Paul Jones' keyboard playing, but they're my bass and guitar and drums band and as well. But I love his Rhodes playing on the live album, and I love his organ playing on Since I've Been Loving You as well. So yeah, there's just so much to pick from.
No, good picks.
Yeah.
And our final quick fire 10, Dan. So 10 short and sharp answers to questions. I'll kick off with first keyboard you ever owned.
Yamaha PSS 50.
Oh, awesome.
It's over there. That's why I can.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's still around. Yeah.
Most important pre-gig ritual.
An apple.
That's cool.
Yeah, I love apples.
That's great.
Yeah.
Guitars, sexy or an abomination?
No, go on, get rid of them. Terrible.
That's what we love.
I went and saw Herbie Hancock, and then he pulled one of them out. I'm like, what? No, don't do it. I'm playing all this lovely piano all night, and then you pick up this thing. It's like, what are you doing?
Well done, Dan. We love strong opinions. Well done. Excellent. Have you ever used the transpose button?
Yep. Guilty. Because people want to play with capos, and that's cheating. So I'm going to do it too.
Here.
Sometimes people want to tune down to E flat too. But the one time you can't transpose is Hammond.
True.
So there's several, like the guy who played for Stevie Ray Vaughan, Rhys Wyans, he had to learn all the black notes because Stevie Ray Vaughan tuned to E flat. No transpose for him. But you can mod him actually to do it, but
yeah, but still.
It's not good for him.
No. Favourite gig you've ever done, if that's possible?
Probably one of the Let It Bleed album shows we did with Tim Rogers. It got real. That's all I'll say. Yeah, just felt like a real gig. Yeah, that was really cool.
Similar vein, favourite city you've ever played?
Is it naff to say LA?
No.
Not if you're Australian, no.
Yeah, no, it was just good because and it wasn't because it was any massive gig or anything. It was just different. And it's like the backline list was, we've got a B3 and a Leslie 122. Is that okay? And I'm like, okay. Yeah. Just the amount of sort of service you got and just the vibe of the place. Yeah, that was... And I haven't played overseas an awful lot. But yeah, that was really good. Just House of Blues in LA.
And probably relates well to that. Best thing about playing live, what do you love about it?
When everyone gets it right. And what that does to not only yourselves, but to the people watching. That real communal sort of feeling that you get from it.
What's the worst thing about playing live?
Loading in or out. Probably the out. In's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. And aside from a reliable transpose switch for a Hammond, what's something you'd like to see invented that would make your life as a keyboard player easier?
They've probably all been invented. I just can't afford them.
Yeah, like a 2700.
Yeah, like a 2700. I still think I'd still think I'd need an organ to go with that. Like, they're good at the KB3 thing's okay, but once you've had a real one, like, you can't not. It's more the Leslie than anything, but yeah, I don't know, just lighter things, I guess, as I get older, things that don't weigh as much. Yeah, some sort of anti-gravity device.
And finally, your favourite non-musical activity or hobby?
Electronics, which is weird. And it kind of always ends up being related to music in some way. But I do it for a job, and it just really interests me, and it always has. It kind of ties in with music, but yeah, fixing things. I love fixing things.
You're not alone in that. I mean, our last guest, Mike Garson, said music was his hobby and his work, and they're inseparable. So
yeah, I'd like to be able to blend the two. There's just not the money in it. No,
sadly,
unfortunately. But I did try for a bit to do playing and repairing, but even then, like, musos have got no money. When are they going to pay you?
That's right.
But the electronics. Yeah. That's favorite. And hanging out with the kids. I love hanging out with my kids. So good.
No, that's always good. Dan, can't thank you enough. I'm hoping to see you live at some stage. Is the Rooftop thing, are you touring different cities, or is it based out of Brisbane? I didn't ask you that before.
Yeah, we've mainly done it around Brisbane, but we're starting to expand it out. Part of that is I have to cut down on the amount of stuff I take because we can't fly at all.
No.
But yeah, we do want to sort of take it around. Unfortunately, there's several Beatles things getting around at the moment, so it might not be for a while until that all settles down. But you might just have to come up here.
Yeah, that's right. I look, love Brizzy. Look, I'd argue it's one of the music capitals of Australia.
Sounds terrible going to Brisbane. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, no,
it's a whole idea, David.
That's right. So no, can't thank you enough, Dan. It's been an absolute pleasure, and look forward to seeing what happens in what should be a much, much, much longer career and where things go. So we'll keep in touch, but really appreciate your time.
No, that's all right. Thanks for having me on.
And there we have it, Paul. Another great interview. Dan was an absolute pleasure to have on.
Yeah, a really, really great guy, as I said in the intro, and it was really nice chatting to him and getting his perspective on playing music and all the different styles he's explored, particularly through the lens of a Hammond player.
Absolutely, yeah. So one day I'm going to own one of those Hammonds if it kills me, Paul, one day. And a 2700 too from Kurzweil.
Yeah, well, mortgage your house a couple of times and you should be good. Do you know the problem for us Australians, and sorry to harp on guests for those not from Australia, but just you can get out your tiny violins and sympathise with us. It's very hard to get hold of Hammonds here. They're not sort of around every street corner. They're a really rare item, and then you've got to find one that's working properly and all the rest of it. So it's a tricky thing, David.
No, it is, but I can still dream. So, yes. So, no, thanks everyone for joining us again. As always, a big shout out to our gold and silver supporters, Brother Paul Brown from the Waterboys, Tammy Catcher of Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you, Tammy, as always. The musicplayer.com forums, Radio Grande, you think I'd be able to pronounce it by now. Radio Grande, that brilliant band that reimagines not traditional rock songs with a real funk twist. Highly recommended. And last but not least, Midnight Mastering. If you're creating your own music and want someone to do a great job of mixing and mastering, Mike at Midnight Mastering is your guy. So thank you to all our supporters. As always, we love hearing from you. Do drop us a line at editor@keyboardchronicles.com, our Facebook page. Just search for the Keyboard Chronicles, the same for Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn even, the whole thing. We've got it all. Very lastly, we do appreciate our supporters on Patreon that I've already mentioned. We do, at the lowest tier, just that coffee a month price does help us keep this little boat afloat. So we hugely appreciate that if you considered jumping in there. And if you're a YouTube, I think this will be the first time, Paul, and it's at the end, so most people, according to YouTube analytics, will have logged off now, except for Joe Mascara.
It's you, me, and Joe at this point,
right? Do consider subscribing to the Keyboard Chronicles channel if you're watching this on YouTube, because that does help as well. So thank you, Paul, for joining me. We'll be definitely talking very, very soon. To pull back the curtain, we might be reconvening in about 5 hours for another interview. But yes, thank you as always.
Sleep is for the weak, David. It's for the weak.
That's right. And most importantly, thanks to you all out there for listening, and we'll see you back here next episode.